5 years ago. It had only been a couple of months since Benjamin Hayne had left his life in Stonehaven Keep to set out and face the visions given to him 10 years ago, just a few days after his brother was born. It wasn't easy going from a place where most things were taken care of for you to a life where you fended for yourself, but over time, Ben got the hang of it. He sat in his tent after a morning drink and small breakfast. He was mastering his multiplicity state, where he sent out parts of his mind to watch over things, witness results, and make sure things that needed to happen could. No one, not even his mother, understood the extent of his power. As Ben focused his mind, he began to pull in the different wisps of thought he'd sent out to observe the time stream. In his mind, he sat in a plain blue room. A chair in which he sat was the only furniture, and there were no features that told of walls or floors. The first being stepped through the blue veil, and soon followed by some 20 others, as he was soon surrounded by copies of himself. Ben smiled. He'd come a long way since the days when he could only manage 1 or 2 of these time spirits. No one could see them, and they could only act in a minimal influence role if they took a host, leaving the host with an extreme sense of déjà vu.
Well.
He broke the silence as his copies looked at him. He took a deep breath, knowing how much this next part would hurt.
Show me what you've brought for me.
In a simple formation of a circle, the spiritual copies of Benjamin Walker Hayne closed around him until they absorbed into his body. The pain was not immediate, but when it did come, it took all the young man's strength not to pass out. Waves of memories of different times, people, moments, places that all flooded into his mind. It would take him days to search through all the information, but he was sure of what he was looking for this time. Just as he thought about it, though, a face flashed. Then, a moment later, so did another. He'd found him. A man who'd flashed in the timeline he'd seen through contact with his brother. A man he recognized as being important. The good news was he was only a few miles from the site where he and this man would meet. The bad news was that Ben had no idea the means of the man's arrival. He did finally have a name thanks to a future version of himself, Tyrus Clade. This was the first of the 2 people he was supposed to find, and Benjamin wasn't sure how this man would impact his brother's future, or how the blind thief girl was going to fit in either. Ben felt a presence there with him in the expanse of the desert, but he couldn't figure it out until that night. Ben lit a fire and was shocked to see a light fog surrounding his camp. There was no moisture, and so Ben immediately figured out that the fog had to be artificial. He suspected a shepherd was behind it, but his surveillance with his time spirits had told him nothing. He went into a quiet state of meditation to see what he might know from his own observations of his brother's timeline and his own memories. A picture flashed of a young, dark-skinned man transforming into a large beast. Ben opened his eyes slowly in realization.
It's you, isn't it?
He didn't even consider it crazy that he was talking to a mysterious desert fog.
How did you get all the way out here?
Benjamin Walker Hayne used his memories of how his father would reach out to calm someone when they were frightened. Not sure why he thought this particular being felt frightened, or even if it was a being. And so 3 days would pass and the fog never left his camp, even when Ben went to survey his surroundings and hunt for a water source. After hours of this, Ben would return and just talk to the fog as though it were a person.
No water today, sir. A few promising sites to survey tomorrow, though.
It was strange for Ben. As he talked more to this fog, he became more attached to it. He didn't go into any of his meditative states or use time spirits, as he didn't want to confuse himself about the events he was sure would unfold before him soon.
I know you're scared. Something has stopped you from returning to your true form. Surely after these few days you can trust me.
Ben didn't want to sound irritated, but he felt it come across despite his effort to be coaxing.
I won't leave you here. Focus on my voice, Tyrus. Tyrus Clade, hear me. This is your name. Tyrus, remember.
The name slipped easily from his lips, as if he'd spoken it hundreds, even 1,000 times before. With the distinct feeling that he should leave those words in the air, Ben ate in silence and went to sleep, hoping that whatever was supposed to occur would conclude. He woke suddenly, as if someone had called to him. It was barely dawn, and though he was used to early mornings, his senses were still dulled by sleep. He heard it, a soft groan followed by a moan. They were human sounds. He scrambled to get free of his tent while gathering his weapons.
Hello?
Benjamin was a trained fighter, but the sudden force which had woken him had him on edge. "Help me." The words were so weak that Ben couldn't be sure he had heard them. "Please, help me." Those ones Ben heard, and he instantly closed the distance with himself and a quite nude, young, dark-skinned man, obviously having been beaten and looking extremely malnourished.
Tyrus Clade? My name is Benjamin Walker. I'm going to help you.
Ben rushed to grab an animal skin from his tent and a canteen of his remaining water rations from the previous day. When he'd wrapped the young man up and given him several gulps of water, he pulled the flask away and allowed the man to gather himself. "How do you know my name?" Benjamin Walker was completely unsure of how to answer him.
This is Diana Corona, and you're listening to Shepherd, Journey of the Time Walker.
Present day. It had been 3 hard days' travel from the trade city of Oberon to the edge of the desert expanse. Benjamin had parted ways with the group once more, but left Elisbeth Oren to get to know his brother Byron and the boy's rather distant bodyguard Varek. They traveled in mostly silence, as it seemed both males preferred the quiet, while Elisbeth was only quiet when she wanted to steal something. She was quickly becoming less of a fan of these new companions, and wished she'd insisted on going with Benjamin to round up Tyrus, who had split off from them before the clash at Stonehaven Keep nearly a week ago. Elisbeth was relieved as the arch of the gates appeared over the horizon.
Oh God, yes. Social activity.
Are you so starved for noise?
Byron's sarcasm, with an added playful sound, let her know he meant nothing by it.
You two are like traveling with a funeral procession.
She made a face both Byron and Varek didn't see.
Just the way we like it. Right, Varek?
Whatever you say.
So, how do you see anyway?
Elisbeth was used to the question, but in this case Byron had framed it in a less, "Holy crap, you see stuff, but your eyes, I thought that meant..."
I release small energy bursts from my hands, and then I perceive what interrupts their path.
The way Byron responded hit Elisbeth funny, and she didn't understand why. It was a different reaction than the one she was used to, where people asked more weird questions and treated her like a freak.
Halt! Identify yourselves.
Byron stood up in the bed of the cart, jumped over the side, and put his hands up. The other 2 companions followed in slower fashion, jumping from the back of the cart and then catching up with the prince. Byron stood in front of the 2 guards and meant to draw back the hood of his cloak. The guards were edgy. Byron could tell whatever had put them on alert had caused them all a great deal of stress. Both guards' faces were dirty with caked mud, and they stank horribly, as if they'd not had the time to bathe.
I'm just removing my hood. Easy, all right?
Byron slowly pulled back his hood and saw relief wash over the men.
Sorry, sir. Didn't mean to startle you. It's just we've been on edge since the attack. The enemy was invisible. By the time we realized we was under any threat, it's too late to react.
The guard's face twisted in some kind of pain from the memories he was forcing himself to live once more.
Stonehaven was attacked a week ago by a man called the Puppeteer, a lieutenant of Jakin.
Byron drew in his breath, and his face settled in a scowl.
He was trying to send a message to my father. All he got was our attention.
Byron drew up his hood again. He was planning to step into the city, and so he did not want his identity to be broadcast until he was ready.
My companions and I will help in any way we can.
He especially eyed Varek, but expected Elisbeth to heed him as well, which he soon realized may have been unreasonable, as she punched him in the arm in a nerve cluster, causing it to go numb.
Please keep my arrival neat to know, sirs.
The last thing Byron wanted was a fuss over his arrival here. The guards nodded in the affirmative. The other guard, who never uttered a word, gave a signal to open the gates to the frontier barracks and Fort William. Byron's father hated that a fort was named after him. Byron shared his disposition about it. If Byron ever did rule this land, he would make it illegal to name things after him. Byron seemed like a dumb name for a city or a fort anyway. Byron and Varek walked in near lockstep as they took in their surroundings. The fort and the barracks were enclosed by a 7-foot wall of concrete that stretched for about 20 miles in either direction. That was the outer wall leading to the desert expanse. Beyond the expanse, which stretched for some miles, was a wooded land, and beyond that was Jaken's prison. Byron and Varek took in more of their surroundings. There were quarters for civilians, stables with livestock, and an armory. In the center of the space was a 6-story tower where a sentry sat at the top to watch the expanse and warn of incoming enemies. There were buildings that were ravaged, thatched roofs burned out. They could be missed as the destruction only seemed to be on a few buildings. It was as if the people that did it only did so as they passed by them. Varek patted Byron on the shoulder and told his charge that he would be heading to meet with the leader of this place. Byron continued to drift past the central part of town. He looked for something that might catch his eye. The cool, crisp fall air and gray mist that fell against the soft browns and yellows relaxed Byron's mind. He walked almost in a trance as he let his surroundings consume him. It was about 5 minutes of walking before Byron saw something that did catch his eye. It seemed out of place near one of the walls outside of the soldiers' barracks. Byron knew after a few moments that this was a place where bodies were being prepared for burial. Byron walked closer, almost involuntarily drawn towards the dead forms covered in sheets. Byron knew they were bodies because there had been a plague that broke out years ago when he was much younger. Stonehaven, no matter how blessed it had seemed with its protective barriers, wasn't immune to the outbreak. Over 200 people died, and Byron never forgot the forms, wrapped in cloths of all kinds, being carted out of the city. Byron never forgot how much that dulled the city's spirits, and how long it took to get it back. He saw it all from the windows of his rooms. He remembered how scared his father and Benji were. Entranced by what he saw, Byron walked the final steps before he was beside one of the bodies. This one's face and shoulders were exposed. Byron wanted to turn away, but he found himself drawn to the sunken, pale white face. The boy was older than Byron. His long, natural brown curls adorned his head like a crown. Byron wondered how this boy might have died. He didn't realize his hand was reaching out to tuck a hand that had fallen free from the sheet.
What are you doing?
Byron whipped around at the angry questioner so that his back was facing the body. He hadn't realized that a short blade was near the edge alongside the boy, and as he turned, the top of his fingers in his right hand drew across the edge of it, slicing them open. Byron pulled his hand up to his face to examine it, forgetting about the voice that had surprised him mere seconds earlier.
I asked you what you were doing.
Byron froze. Something was very wrong here. The young man in front of him looked exactly like the young man he saw lying dead beside him. Same hair, same face, although this one was filled with the color of life. Byron's face, hidden behind his hood, held much confusion. The man in front of him closed the few steps between them as he noticed Byron's fingers.
Are you alright?
I'll be fine.
Byron's stutter caused the man to take a less aggressive stance and tone. Then, looking up from the wounded fingers in the mysterious mirror image that Byron thought might be some kind of vengeful spirit, The eyes Byron saw were all too familiar.
I did not know it was you, sire. I beg your pardon.
Byron watched the man panic, and it gave him that all-too-familiar anxiety. He didn't like most attention, least of all this kind, and it took him several moments to gain his senses enough to speak.
Please don't do that. No one needs to know I'm here. You'll give me away.
Byron was still shaken by the man's appearance. The man stood slowly and realized the look on Byron's face was one of confusion, and quickly realized why it was there.
My name is Ron. He's my twin brother, Sammy. Twin means we shared our mother's womb. We were identical in every way, except he was fun-loving, and I always liked to be serious.
The tone was so matter-of-fact that Byron wanted to reach out and tell Roan that it was okay to feel something. Byron always was sensitive to unexpressed emotion. He read body language and situations like other people might read a map.
You've lost others.
Byron turned back to the dead man he had looked over. Roan stood next to him, answering his questions as he placed a necklace of beads on his brother's chest.
He died earlier this morning from his injuries. I knew he was already gone a week ago when the attack happened. 2 brothers, a sister, and both of our parents to the plague. We came here after they died, Sammy and I. This is where orphans usually go to be raised in the ways of fighting while doing the chores that keep the fort working smoothly.
Roan's face became sadder, though the features would be missed by most. Byron recognized it. It was in the eyes, the same eyes that he had seen in his father.
Sammy and I, we were going to do 5 years of military service, combine our lands, and raise pigs.
Byron placed a gentle hand on the man's shoulder. It wasn't until he did this that he realized the man was significantly taller than him. He was nearly 6 feet tall.
When are they being laid to rest?
Tonight, but our commander and the man-at-arms both died in the attack. No one knows the prayers for the military ceremony of rest.
I'll do it. I've been a part of several state funerals for dignitaries and such. I know it. I will do it.
Byron took his hand from Roan's shoulder and placed his fist against his own heart.
It would be my honor.
Roan looked at the young prince, still hooded, and mixed in with the soft grays and browns of this fall's weather. The boy felt like a godsend. Roan remembered Byron's request from when they first met and resisted the urge to acknowledge his royalty. After asking if there was something he could help with now, Roan took Byron towards the stables. Roan had taken to looking after the children to make sure they were occupied and stayed out of the way of the soldiers and carpenters rebuilding things, including the gate that led out to the expanse. Byron took in the surroundings, seeing them now through the prism of the dead he had just visited. He swore under his breath. When they entered the stables, Byron was taken aback slightly by the stench, but only for a moment. Roan stopped and grabbed a feed bag. Byron stopped and looked over at him.
Is there a place to hang my cloak?
Yes, here.
Byron unfastened the small copper holder where the fabric was pulled through and handed the cloak off without questioning it. No longer concerned with revealing his identity because the stables were seemingly only populated by animals and 2 young children, who Byron guessed were about 10. Once Roan placed the cloak on a hook near the entrance, Byron poured a slight bit of his power into himself and reached down to pick up a feed bag as well. He noticed Roan's expression as he did this, and Byron felt satisfied by it.
These are for the cows in one bowl we have. He's being prepared for the harvest feast in a few days. The village close to us will be joining. It'll be a huge party.
Oh, I see.
Byron never really liked parties, but now wasn't the time to say that. Roan seemed happy about it, despite losing his twin brother. The 2 put the feed in the pens with the cows in the bowl. Byron then followed along as Roan finished with other tasks, such as saddling horses, though he kept his distance as not to trigger his dislike of the animals. An hour passed, and Byron didn't feel too bad. The only thing that was an issue was the stares from the children in the stables. The stares were always in confusion. Byron was used to the stares because of his white hair and purple eyes, but every time he got the look from someone who really should have known better, He felt terrible. As Roan and Byron left the stables, and Byron retrieved his cloak, he remembered something he wanted to ask.
Is there a place where I can get a cloak more in my size? I'm also looking for some light armor.
Yes, I can take you to get both of those things. Easy, come with me.
They did just that, and Byron, who was never too picky, picked out something in minutes from the armorer and then a clothing store. Only spending a few coins, Byron felt much better now in clothes and armor that fit. He was still upset that he'd lost his other set in Oberon, but this was a nice comfort for him.
Thanks.
Byron pulled straps and buckled his armor, which was a full armor this time. He didn't prefer it, but he was not too upset when he felt how sturdy it was. Byron threw the cloak over his shoulders and used his fastener from the other cloak he bought in Oberon. Varek would probably make a stink about the money again, but Byron didn't care in the slight haze of satisfaction.
Thanks for that. This feels much better.
No problem, Byron. I'm going to help with some projects before sundown in the burial ceremony. Would you care to join me?
Byron didn't weigh the idea too long before answering.
Sure, I'd be glad to.
The prince decided to leave his hood down. It was time to break the ice and get all this anxiety over with.
This is R.C. Anthus, and you're listening to Shepherd, Journey of the Time Walker.
Over the next several hours, Roan and Byron did small odd tasks such as running for materials, helping hold things in place to repair buildings, and other such tasks. Byron noticed the effort seemed to lack direction and realized that the top leadership deaths in the conflict did more than rob the fort of its military edge. It also lost its will.
I've tried to help them, but I'm not sure it's working.
Byron was stunned by the line, thinking somehow this curly-haired orphan soldier had read his exact thoughts.
You're doing okay, I think.
You've helped. People see you, and they get a little more confident that Stonehaven is backing us.
The two walked for a long time as they continued rounds to help out and get people to work who seemed listless. Byron really got a feel for this place and its people, and after he'd talked to Roan, Byron didn't look at the people's stares with quite the same tinge of anxiousness or annoyance, only with pity and a desire to help, even if it was just to offer hope from his presence there. Byron gave appreciative nods whenever he found a gaze and drowned his own feelings with a reminder of why this was important to let them see him. As Roan and Byron walked out near the gate, Byron stopped and took in a scene with Varek and Elisbeth standing side by side with 3 guards as people came in from the gates. They'd heard a call from the tower earlier. Byron remembered, but Roan had said not to worry about it. Byron made his way to his companions to see what this was all about.
Yeah, we've been dealing with this for the last 3 months.
What's going on here?
Refugees from beyond the expanse. They're fleeing Jaken's allies and crossing unguarded.
Is there anything you can do?
Nothing, sire. We don't have the manpower to send out a blind force into the forest beyond the expanse. Besides, we can't risk it without a shepherd with us. What's worse is most of these refugee caravans are attacked because they're easy targets.
Why are they being rounded up?
To make twisted soldiers for Jaken.
Byron paused a moment and took in the face Varek made. A female refugee spoke. Byron's instinct kicked in as the language wasn't one he recognized. He closed his eyes and relaxed his mind. Carefully, he began a slight pour inside it. As he did, he opened his eyes, which now glowed. He answered the woman in her own language. They shared a pair of exchanges before Byron turned to speak to his confused companions.
She says they were attacked by at least 20 men and women. They had powers like us. Well, she said they had powers. I added like us.
Damn, I'll go alone and see if I can't throw a wrench in his operation.
Oh yeah, because I'm just gonna sit here and wait while something possibly goes wrong.
Fine. You want to come along too, Elisbeth?
Byron swore under his breath.
What? Of course they do. Wait, what are we talking about?
We should set out at dawn.
We'll have to take the horses. It'll be the fastest way to travel. You can ride with Oren.
Agreed.
Why doesn't he get on his own damn horse?
He's terrified of the things.
Oh, okay.
Besides, you'll need someone to play guide anyway.
Yeah, that's probably alright. If he freaks out, though, I'm ditching him the first chance I get.
Deal.
I'm right here. I can still hear you.
Yes. Right, well, I'll have to make preparations. Nice new armor, by the way. It suits you.
Thanks.
Later that evening, as the cold settled in, the fort's residents came out to honor and bury their dead. Byron helped lower several bodies into the large grave that had been dug carefully, but with haste. Roan had grown quite distant as the process began, and Byron could tell the reality of his brother's death was hitting him hard. He felt empathy for all the people here, especially Roan, who earlier had seemed so unaffected by his twin brother's death. When the last body was laid to rest, Byron walked up the makeshift ramp and stood before the gathered crowd. Closing his eyes for a short moment, he drew in breath and then exhaled, opening his eyes and taking in all the people here. He had confidence enough to fight off the pang of anxiety he felt. When he finally spoke, he had walked and taken a spot next to Roan, who did not acknowledge him.
I promise you, before I start with the prayers and burial traditions, these men and women will not have died in vain. Please have faith in me. We will stop the man responsible for this. I swear it.
Having made his promise, Byron began reciting the warrior's prayer and leading his people the way his father would. Soon he would lead his first battle, but that journey would begin tomorrow.